Today on the podcast, I have Kelli Fetter from Handwriting Solutions. Kelli is an occupational therapist who specializes in handwriting tutoring and instruction for kids who are struggling, especially kids who struggle with dysgraphia or dyslexia, or anyone who needs extra support with handwriting. Kelli knows firsthand how it is to have a child struggle with handwriting, as her daughter is diagnosed with dyslexia and dysgraphia. It was because of that diagnosis that Kelli went on a journey to find a way to help her daughter and realized that there was no one in this space filling the gap, helping these kids with their handwriting, especially those with dysgraphia. So, as an occupational therapist, Kelli has decided to pivot her practice and she's making sure that she's focusing on these kids and their handwriting. She does most of it virtually, although she does some in person. She has so many resources for families because she wants all students to feel successful and confident in their writing. I am so excited for you to hear this conversation with Kelli. I feel like we connect on so many levels because we both know the importance of handwriting. We know the importance of play and teaching our kids through play and making sure they are set up for success, not only in preschool and kindergarten, but in all the years later. Hey, Kelli, welcome to the Littles Love Learning podcast.
Hello, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
I am so excited to have you. We connected online, and when I saw your account, I just knew that we were soul sisters because I absolutely love handwriting and think that it's so important. And I've never seen an account that is only about handwriting and a specialized handwriting tutor. So, what you are doing in this world is so needed.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, everything you post on handwriting, I'm just like over here cheering and clapping because I was like, somebody else gets it. But yeah, that's essentially why I started it, is because nobody else is helping these kids. And there is a huge need and a gap that needs to be filled. So that's what we're doing.
Well, we're so thankful you're here. And why don't you take us back to the beginning of how you became an occupational therapist and sort of your journey into this space?
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, I practiced in occupational therapy and pediatrics, outpatient, early intervention, school systems, private schools, kind of across the board. And I did that for several years. And then I had my daughter, and I always knew, I had a passion for working with children. I always knew that that's where my heart was. Once I had my daughter, I took a position as adjunct professor, and I taught naturally pediatrics as well as kinesiology, which actually interestingly kind of goes hand in hand when we're talking about handwriting and how the body works. So fast forward to when my daughter got her dyslexia and dysgraphia diagnosis. And this was, oh my goodness, over 5 years ago, right at 5 years ago. I thought, okay, I have all this pediatric OT knowledge, but you know what? They didn't really teach us about dysgraphia, and they didn't really teach us about handwriting. I knew the some foundational skills and some motor skills, but other than that, the whole educational perspective and language centers and neurology of all of that, I just was lost. And so fortunately, we found an amazing resource for her dyslexia remediation. And so that was beautiful. And we still work with her today. But again, this dysgraphia piece, I was floored that, first of all, nobody even knew what it meant. And then second, where is the support for this? So naturally, as the parent, I just took every course, every training, read every book, read what very little research there is out there, and just soaked it all up and tried to piece this together of how can we help kids, particularly my daughter, learn to write? How can we remediate her handwriting? How can we get her thoughts out? What's the best practice for all of this? And pretty much after that, I had friends start to ask, and they're like, well, she doesn't, quote, look like she has dysgraphia, and her handwriting's beautiful. How can she? And so it just led to a lot of education. And then I started working with their kids, and then Handwriting Solutions was born. And again, like I said, it's because there's this huge gap, and I can't let these kids slip through the cracks anymore. They're not qualifying for services in school. They're not qualifying for outpatient OT. Most of our academic tutors don't understand handwriting. So really that's where we come in. We fill this gap and this need. And obviously it's just a huge passion of mine.
Yes, well, it is so needed, like I mentioned, and to have someone who is specific for handwriting and focused on that one piece, it's so important. That is the piece that gets overlooked in classrooms. As a classroom teacher, I admit that as well. You have a class of 25 students, you're trying to teach them all letter formation, but you cannot watch every child form every letter every time. You're doing your best, but it is so difficult. And so these kids, especially the ones like you said who aren't qualifying for services, they're the ones slipping through the cracks. And so you have filled that gap for them.
Yeah, and you're exactly right. It's really it's not the teacher's fault, it's not it's kind of a systemic issue when you look
Mhm.
about it or think about it. And so yeah, I think again the need is there, and we're seeing so much more need, obviously post pandemic, as well as the students that we work with don't always have dysgraphia. They could just have some missed learning, missed instruction. A lot of our kids with dyslexia struggle with writing. Sometimes our kids with autism or other developmental disorders may struggle too.
Yes. And I would love for you to tell us more about dysgraphia because as a teacher, I learned very little about dyslexia when I was going through school, and I've learned so much more now that I've jumped right into the science of reading. But I will say that dysgraphia is still not well known or well discussed in these circles about when we're talking about literacy. So if you could talk to us about dysgraphia, that would be so helpful.
Right. Yeah. I have a whole like mission now. I was like, I'm going to make it the science of writing as
Yes,
well.
yes. I'm on
But
board.
exactly. But unfortunately, there is not a lot of research, not near as much research on dysgraphia as there is on dyslexia. I am seeing some gains with that, but essentially when I describe dysgraphia to parents or really to anyone, I think about learning disabilities as the umbrella. So you've got specific learning disabilities, and then there are three parts of that, or three wings, you could say. So there's the specific learning disability in reading, which is dyslexia, that is specific learning disability in writing, which is dysgraphia, and then in math, which is the dyscalculia. So, and when you think about academic and learning and all of that, oftentimes that reading and that writing is so they coexist a lot. So, you know, we know that there are frequent comorbidities, meaning that if your child has one, the chances of them having another is higher. As far as what dysgraphia looks like, obviously the number one sign is that written output. So the illegible and messy handwriting. That's obviously the easiest, quickest sign that we see with kids. They're just not understanding that letter formation and line placement, and those skills just aren't sticking. And they're really, really struggling with that. They might have reversals. Their pencil grasp sometimes can be awkward. Again, not always. The interesting thing with dysgraphia is there's not like a specific diagnostic criteria. We kind of have to look at it holistically and look at the big picture. So I always say that as a caveat of like, your child might have a beautiful pencil grasp and have dysgraphia, or your child might struggle with that. They also might struggle with that written expression piece. So translating their thoughts onto paper could be a struggle. And really one of the biggest red flags that I see is that frustration with writing, as well as that avoidance of writing. If I'm seeing those two, I have questions. I have wonders of what's going on, what's the barrier.
Those are great points. And I'm actually thinking of a specific student in kindergarten that I have been working with recently. And she does have a beautiful grasp and her penmanship is legible, but she has a very hard time getting her ideas down on paper. And almost where you would think there shouldn't be a problem here. Other areas are clicking, but this one area is not clicking. And by this part of kindergarten, I would expect to see it a little bit more fluid. So something like that makes me wonder if how would someone go about getting that investigated if they were concerned about dysgraphia?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up that discrepancy as well, because oftentimes that is a clue for us as well. Often these kids are bright. They are highly verbal. And so it's that mismatch of ability and performance. And we can see very easily with their written output that that performance is not what they're verbalizing. So I love that you bring up that discrepancy. As far as what families can do if they are concerned, I always start with the handwriting assessment that we provide because that will give us a bigger picture of their strengths. It will look holistically at all of their written output, and break down individual areas so that we can see where those barriers and those gaps are. And then start with some handwriting tutoring, some explicit instruction, and see how they're progressing with that. And if within 3, 4 months, we're still like, we have some wonders, then they would need to go to that neuropsychologist or educational psychologist to get that formal diagnosis, which is wonderful because they can pull our handwriting assessment and our findings to help support such a diagnosis.
Okay, those are great tips. Thank you. And I will definitely share that with her parents. Like you said, her verbal is so high. She's very bright. So that's why there's a mismatch between her verbal abilities and then this written expression.
Right.
Well,
Yeah.
let's switch gears a little bit and let's think back to the beginning when students are just getting into, before they even get into handwriting, and their parents are thinking, oh, I can't wait for them to get into handwriting. They're going to have beautiful handwriting one day. What are the foundational skills that we want to work on before we even put pencils in our kids' hands?
Well, that's exactly what I was going to say. Don't put the pencil in their hand.
Yes.
Don't do it. I know it's tempting. I know it's tempting, but we have got to build those foundational skills first. They need to have some solid core stability, meaning their tummy muscles and their back muscles and their shoulder muscles have to be strong and stable for their hand to be able to hold a pencil. So that means a lot of climbing and crawling and some deep core heavy work to help strengthen that. We also want to do some fine motor strengthening as well. So I love Play-Doh and clay and scissors and stringing beads to work on some coordination. All of these are very play-based things, which is appropriate for a 3 and 4 and 5-year-old. They need to be engaging in play-based activities that will be eventually building their skills for writing. But what I see so often is this push to put the pencil in that child's hand earlier and earlier, and really that just ends up frustrating the child. It leads to really poor habits. That's the kids that I see come in and they just their motor memory and motor learning is impaired because it was pushed a little bit too early, because their hands aren't ready. Their bones and their musculature and their hands just aren't ready to hold a tool and have that very fine motor movement. So tons and tons of play opportunity to help strengthen both the body and the hands. And then also you can definitely work in some alphabet play as well. So I love just playing games to name the letters. That's wonderful. I love games where we build the letters 3-dimensionally. We can use Handwriting Without Tears has the wooden pieces, or you can literally take sticks for some nature play, or you can use wiki sticks, whatever you have available. You can start building the letters. So again, that doesn't require as much fine motor control, but they're still getting that experience and that awareness and building the learning foundations for handwriting essentially. And then, then we want to start obviously coloring. My goodness, coloring is a lost art. So I love, love, love that. I mean, I love when you go to restaurants and they still give the crayons and the coloring paper. I'm like, yes, please. I don't even care if your child is 2 years old. Put it in their hand, let them scribble, because that is some seriously good work for their hands. And then we kind of progress, I know we were going to talk about some development. So when we think about kids learning to write, the first thing that they do is they are scribbling all over the paper. It's great. That's what we want to see. Then they start learning to imitate vertical lines. Again, those are the easiest. Gravity kind of helps us out. horizontal lines. We start bringing in some circles, and then eventually a square, and then the diagonals, and eventually the triangle. So you can see that progression of easiest to more challenging. That diagonal and triangle does not come until 5 years old developmentally, typically. So why would we expect kids at 3 and 4 years old to write letters when so many of the letters have curves and diagonals in them? So it's really just matching their instruction with their development.
Yes, absolutely. I remember when my son was learning uppercase A and his diagonal would go diagonal for one line and then the other diagonal go the same direction. So he had parallel lines because he could
Yeah.
not get them going in different directions. And he worked really hard on that. And when he got it, he was so proud of himself. We would talk about that A. He could build the A out of Play Doh. We actually used handwriting without tears when he was home with me. And so it was really fun to see that progression. That triangle and those diagonal lines are very tricky.
It's very tricky. And that's also why when we instruct in handwriting or remediate in handwriting, we don't start with that capital A, right? Because that's one of the hard ones. So we start with easier letters that have just vertical and diagonal, or vertical and horizontal. So the capital L, the capital H, and then again, we proceed to more challenging diagonals.
Now, what advice would you have for parents who do send their kids to preschool and the preschool teachers are asking the children to write? They're asking them to write in a journal or they're asking them to write letters, and they're probably not instructing on how to form the letters. And their kids are coming home and they are what we like to call drawing letters. They are kind of looking at a letter and imitating it and drawing it in a way that is not the correct way. What kind of advice would you have for those parents?
Ooh, that's a good one. That's that's a tricky one. Um, the best I could say is just advocate, 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 advocate. That might mean pulling in a professional like me or you to do an in-service for the preschool teachers. It could also mean just, you don't necessarily have to go into it with you're doing it wrong, but go into it with here's what we can do instead. And we can do multi-sensory activities with writing that will really serve that child so much better in the end. And I love that you bring up the whole drawing letters, because that is another beautiful red flag that we look out for as well. You can tell when a child has automaticity, meaning that it is smooth and controlled and automatic, versus when they are literally just drawing the letter. And they do it differently every single time. I think of an example for this if parents are like, I still don't understand. So if you're thinking about a lowercase h, the child, and that one's just a common one that I see is drawn. So the child will sometimes start at the bottom and make the little hump, and then they go back and add the tall stick. And that's so inefficient that is not going to serve them well at all in the future when it comes to automatic handwriting.
Yes, I've seen that as well. Same with lowercase n, the same thing, starting at the bottom, making the hump and adding the line. Lowercase a, of course, the circle and adding the line. And it's very interesting as a teacher. I can look at a child writing and I know which letters they formed incorrectly without watching them form that letter
Mhm.
incorrectly, because you can see that it looks like it's drawn. It looks like a drawing as opposed to a fluid written letter that was using the correct strokes.
Correct. Yep.
Now, my question for you about students who are drawing letters, once they're getting into kindergarten and first grade, what can parents do at home to support them if there is a need to maybe reteach some of this instruction for handwriting? Not all classrooms are providing handwriting instruction. And so, is there anything a parent should or shouldn't do at home?
Sure. So Learning Without Tears website, I know we've mentioned them before. They have really good letter formation charts that you can print out for free. And that will kind of help guide the parent of where a letter should start. Because I realize this is not necessarily standard knowledge either. When we write, we don't have to think about what we write. It's very automatic and smooth. So oftentimes parents are like, well, I don't know. I don't remember, but that's a really great resource that tells the starting point, the letter strokes, and all of that. So they can use that as a guideline. But again, I would still save the paper to pencil tasks till the end. And I would really meet your child where they are and start bringing in some multisensory play. So that might mean writing letters with shaving cream, or getting some sidewalk chalk and going outside and writing in with sidewalk chalk, or writing with Play-Doh. Sometimes we take a golf tee or a toothpick and smash the Play-Doh flat, and then we write with that. So that's a great fine motor activity, as well as just gives them when we incorporate multisensory learning, essentially it stimulates more parts of the brain and therefore leads to better retention. So this is super easy for parents to kind of set up at home, particularly if they have that formation chart and we say, okay, we're going to work on the letter, or we'll work on Magic C letters. That's the one that we can group those letters by. What Magic C letters are lowercase letters that start with a C. So you've got magic lowercase C, lowercase a, lowercase g, and so on. And you can kind of just pick a little group of letters and just have them practicing with that, again, in that multisensory way, making it fun, making a game out of it. I love game-based learning as well. It just gets the child more engaged with that. And also separating handwriting instruction and handwriting practice from like homework and schoolwork, because you don't want to overload their cognitive ability. So often kids struggle when they have that cognitive overload of they're having to think about how to write and what to write. So taking that piece away and just intentionally practicing on the handwriting skills will help.
That's a great idea. Now, do you recommend uppercase letters first or lowercase letters first?
Developmentally, I do recommend uppercase letters first because it is easier. It is developmentally appropriate for children to learn capitals first. And again, starting with the vertical and horizontal lines and then moving towards lowercase. A little caveat, if the child is older, let's say fourth, fifth grade, and we're going back and remediating, I definitely consider starting with lowercase because lowercase is written more frequently at that point, but really it's very case by case, because they may not be ready for lowercase even at fourth and fifth grade. If they don't have those foundational skills, that's what I look at, their foundational skills. If they don't have those, we're still starting back at the capital.
That makes sense. And I know you have a great chart on your website
Mhm.
sharing the order that you like to introduce the letters. And also you have a chart about the pre-writing lines and how they develop. So I'll make sure to link to all of that because your website is phenomenal. It has lots of resources. Now talk to us a little bit about cursive, how you feel about cursive and when that comes into play.
I love cursive, love it. Oh my goodness. And you know what? I've been watching the news because several states are starting to mandate that cursive be brought back into the classroom, which I just think is beautiful. Also, don't get your hopes up though, because I think we still have a long way to go on bringing cursive instruction back, because we can't just teach it in isolation in third grade and then forget about it. So, sometimes I talk to middle school students and they're like, yeah, I think I learned that maybe back a little bit in the third grade. And I'm like, okay, well, but I love cursive because for our kids who really struggle with print, sometimes that means our kids with dysgraphia or just kids who struggle with print in general. Maybe it's motor skills, maybe it's language skills. Cursive is wonderful because for a few reasons. Number one, it gives them almost like a fresh start. So they might be so frustrated with print that they're like, you put a piece of paper in front of them and they're like, absolutely not. Two, once you learn cursive and you have those foundations for it, it ends up being a lot smoother, less motor demands, so there's less pencil pickups. So with print, like with a lowercase k, you have to pick the pencil up 3 times and write 3 different letters, while with cursive it's one fluid motion. So oftentimes kids find that easier. Research also shows that learning cursive in third and fourth grade leads to improved spelling and improved written composition, which I think is very fascinating research. The reason for that I kind of have gleaned, particularly with the spelling piece, is that when you write in cursive, you think about the word as a unit versus when you write in print, it's very separated. You've got, for example, cat, that's C and then an A and a T. But when you write in cursive, it's one unit. So for some reason that has led to improved spelling, which I think is really interesting. As far as when to teach cursive, typically developing kiddos can start as early as end of second grade is what kind of the general recommendations are. If you have a child that is struggling motor wise, you might just kind of have to meet them where they are and developmentally see if they're ready for it or not.
Those are great tips. I taught second grade and my students loved learning cursive. We learned it toward the end of the year and it was a reward, almost a reward to get to. They were so excited to get to cursive and they loved it. And then they work on it in third and fourth grade. And then I think by fifth grade, their teachers didn't require it anymore. So they all wrote in print again. So it was like you said, they'll learn it and maybe practice it for a few years, but then it's gone. And what's interesting to me about cursive is writing it, of course, but also reading it. I feel like as a society, if we lost our ability to read cursive, how would we read all of the documents from the start of our country? I think that that would be quite a shame. We all need to be able to read those documents from long ago. They were written in cursive, so we can't lose that.
Or a note from grandma, let's be
Yeah.
honest, like
Yeah.
I hear that so often from parents. They're like, my kid can't read my writing or can't read notes from grandma. And that's the beauty of learning cursive, because when you learn to write in cursive, guess what? You naturally learn to read in cursive. And that's one of the almost like the bonuses that kids say that come with it. And I love that you mentioned that kids love it.
Me too.
I have so many kids say it's the fancy way to write. So
Yes.
that's motivating because it's fancy, which I just think is great. If you can get that motivation on board, then you're doing good.
Oh, for sure, for sure. And then I have heard you speak about print, cursive, and keyboarding as all part of the same triangle of handwriting. Because many parents might be thinking, you know what? We're moving to a society with all computers. All I do is type, keyboard all day long. So, what is the value or benefit of print or cursive? And I like how you've put them all together on the same triangle. So, if you could speak on that, that would be great.
Yeah, I think absolutely. We have to teach our kids keyboarding too. I remember taking keyboarding classes in elementary school and middle school, and I think even high school I took a few. And again, just like with print, you want that automaticity. We don't want to do the hunt and peck method. So that takes, again, explicit instruction. Oftentimes kids can do that independently. There's computer, games that can facilitate that. But it is a triangle because I want kids to learn all three. And brain science tells us that we really should be learning all three. Recent study came out, I want to say in 23, or it might have even been this year in 2024, that essentially says the brain is more stimulated when a child or when anyone uses pencil to paper versus keyboarding. So I think that is huge. It's better retention. More parts of the brain are being awoken from that pencil to paper. And so I just think the benefits are there. So I think I don't think we have to choose. I think we can have all three. I think we should have all three. And then I think eventually, sure, we let the student decide which one that fits them the best, which one they feel more confident and fluent in, knowing that we always have those foundational skills. And I think about handwriting, sometimes parents forget that it's not just an academic skill, it's a life skill. You're going to use this for the rest of your life. So, I mean, the value is just, it's there.
Absolutely. I think about that with reading too. It's not an academic skill in my eyes. It's not a school subject that a teacher is supposed to teach. It's a life skill. And as parents, we want to make sure that our kids have that strong foundation in reading and in writing and handwriting because it's going to serve them for the rest of their lives.
Yep.
So, We are wrapping up, but I know that you have a lot of myths about handwriting that you've busted on your Instagram account. You had a great series of myth busters. So if you could just tell us maybe one of the most prevalent myths that you see around handwriting and kind of tell us the truth, that would be awesome.
Oh my goodness, yes. So I did a whole series. If you are interested, go back and look at our Instagram, and I think it was on our Facebook too. Yeah, I think we named like 24 myths, which is crazy, right? It's like, but it is handwriting is so there's so many myths out there. I think probably if I had to pick one of the most prominent, well, I'm gonna pick two. I can't pick one. Obviously, we kind of addressed the one of, well, it's handwriting is just it's old fashioned, and technology is going to take over. And I think we busted that one already here today. The second one that I want to bring up is this whole, and this one is very, it's a touchy subject. Kids cannot improve their handwriting past X grade or X years old. That one just baffles me, and I see it all the time. I see it in Facebook groups that are supporting parents of kids who are struggling. And it just, I mean, again, it just baffles me because it is so not true. The way I think about it is if someone had a stroke or a brain injury, would we tell them that they would not be able to regain their writing skills? I don't think so. No, we would give them therapy and intervention and remediation to improve that. And so all it is it's a cognitive and a motor task. So absolutely they can improve in middle school. In high school, we're working with an 18-year-old right now that we're improving his handwriting for future college and job placement. So it is never too late. And I want parents to kind of take comfort in that because it's not like you missed the boat. It's never too late. We can always intervene. We can always help that child.
And that really goes along with that growth mindset. We can always improve. And even if it's only a little bit at a time, if we just work a little bit at a time, we are going to see that growth. That's a great
Yep.
one.
Yeah. And, I think sometimes parents are like, yeah, but my kid's just not motivated. And I get that. I hear that. Absolutely. I think kids are resilient, and I think they have a better growth mindset than adults, honestly. And I think when we find that motivation and give them those quick wins, they'll be on board. Give them
Oh,
just a
yes,
little bit of a quick win, and they're like, all right, I'm in.
which is what you do. Our community is so lucky to have you. Will you tell us a little bit about what you offer to our listeners with Handwriting Solutions?
Absolutely. So, as I mentioned earlier, we start with that handwriting assessment, and that's really the key part of understanding your child and their strengths and their needs. And then we offer one-to-one handwriting tutoring. And that is ongoing throughout the year. And then also, we will soon be announcing our summer camps, which are this is all run virtually, by the way. We do have a small office in person, but I would say the majority of our clients are virtual. So don't be afraid of virtual because it truly looks identical to in-person tutoring. You have the physical materials on hand, and it is truly just being facilitated through the screen with the most highly qualified tutors. So we, again, are going to be announcing some summer camps. We also just have some learning opportunities for parents, for teachers, for therapists. We offer some consultations as well. And as you said, a wealth of information on our website, handwritingsolutions.org. We have a blog, we have a page full of freebies for you all. So again, it's just our mission to help these students, help the teachers, help the parents, get them to the next level.
Well, I will make sure to link all of that down below so that parents can get in touch with you. I'm sure they're going to want to connect after this. And I just have one more question for you before we go. This is called the Littles Love Learning podcast. So I would love to know, what do you love most about working with littles?
Everything. Right? I mean, I think I've been asked this question so many times because that's all I've done, since college. And even in college, it's like I just had a passion for working with kids. And really kids of any age. We see kids from kindergarten to 18 and beyond. We've even had some adult clients too. So what I love, I think, is their love for learning their willingness to make mistakes and it not be a big deal. They're like sponges, it's fun. Oh my goodness, is it fun? Like you can be creative. Um, it's just it's fulfilling. It doesn't feel like a job.
It really is a calling when you work with kids and it's just natural. And I know it
Mhm.
doesn't come naturally to everyone, although I feel like everyone can get better at it if they work at it. But it really is at the absolute best. I agree.
Yep, yep,
Well,
yep. I love it.
Kelly, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for all of your resources. I will make sure to connect all of our listeners with you. If they have more questions, they can reach out. And thank you for what you do for our little ones.
Absolutely. Thank you too. Thanks for allowing me to be here, and I loved it.